You can't write a story that well. What's going on, everybody? KWolfe back with another video. I know it's been a while since I've done any of these breakdowns, and I haven't done one from Supercross this year, but I was in Tampa the other night. This is Monday as of this recording, and after everything that happened, I gotta talk about it because that was one of the coolest races that I've been to, and what a story for Malcolm Stewart to finally get his first 450 win. He's been in that class for so long. They showed the graphic on the screen. That was his 109th start, and he finally gets his first career win. And that, the whole vibe in Tampa at Raymond James Stadium was the same vibe that you got in San Diego last year with Aaron Plessinger getting his first win. And you saw everybody congratulating Malcolm. Who didn't want to see that? Who wasn't pumped to see that? To have Malcolm get his first win, 12 years in the class roughly. His 250 West Supercross title was in 2012, I think, 2011, 2012. He's been in that 450 class ever since, moving on, starting in 2013. And he hasn't really gotten a whole lot of podiums either. He's gotten a few, but just he hasn't been the same guy the last couple years. He missed 2023 pretty much with injury. 2024 wasn't a great year. He's been having trouble with that Husky. He hasn't looked like the same guy through the whoops. All that turned around Saturday night in Tampa, and he looked awesome. And even with Chase Sexton not crashing, Malcolm was going to catch him. I haven't heard or seen one person that would argue that once Malcolm got the chase, even if Chase hadn't crashed, that Malcolm wasn't going to pass him. That was a phenomenal ride. Malcolm looked like the Malcolm of old, especially in the whoops. And that's one of the cool things that I noticed. And unfortunately, it really doesn't get talked about a lot, but Malcolm and really other than Malcolm, I want to say Tomac are the only two guys that I've really seen in the last several years that can adapt to the whoops and find the level lines. And we saw Eli do that earlier this year in Tampa when it was all shootout through the corner before the whoops, and how the whoops had a line right through the middle of them that everyone was pretty much running, and Eli went right against the blocks where it was a little more even. They weren't shootout as much. Nobody was really going over there, and he was making up time. He was using that to his advantage to stay ahead of Jet and ultimately win Anaheim too. And that's what Malcolm did. He was flat. He was along the edge. He wasn't all the way against the blocks, but it was just a phenomenal ride. Chase was on the other side of the whoops, and you saw what happened. It bit him. He damaged the bike. That turns out he messed up the front brake and the throttle, which you could see if you were looking close enough. His front brake, I think, was in the air, but I think he damaged the throttle housing too. And that's what ultimately cost him from going to second to fifth after that crash. It's just the bike was messed up, and now it's game on now that you have Malcolm entering into the mix. Just a great night of racing all around in that 450 class. Huge storylines. I thought after Glendale, we'd have 2, maybe 3 weeks. If nothing happened this coming weekend in Detroit, we would have made it to Dallas. And if not Dallas, then definitely by the time we got to Daytona, there would have been more drama after Jet Lawrence leaving the series with a torn ACL suffered in that final Triple Crown race at Glendale. But we don't even make it through qualifying before, unfortunately, Tomac, and I was watching him. I was watching it on the screen. I wasn't even watching the screen. I was watching him, actually, and it happened right in front of me, and I had the angle of it. His foot slipped. He got it back on, and he didn't get it back on all the way, and slipped again, and you saw what happened, and it was just unfortunate. And it was in the same leg with that Achilles, and man, the group that I was sitting with, we all just, our guts just dropped when we saw that, because who hasn't loved seeing Eli back in beast mode Eli? He hasn't shown it a lot. He hasn't shown beast mode Eli, but he's definitely back to who he was in 2023 before the Achilles in Denver. And it was so heartbreaking, and you just feared the worst when you saw him pointing at his leg and bending over the bike and everything else, and it was just difficult to see. I'm glad he was able to race, but since I was there, I was able to watch. It was probably a good thing that he didn't get the start in the main event, because he couldn't go. He couldn't ride at 85-90% and keep pace. Relaxed pace for him would have still had him in the top 10, and he couldn't do it. His leg wasn't allowing him to do it. You could kind of see on the TV broadcast, I saw it after I watched the race back, he just wasn't able to do anything with that left leg. I'm hoping he's going to be able to recover a little bit in time for Detroit. If it's any worse than that calf, I don't see him racing this weekend. I could be wrong, but it was just heartbreaking to see, and definitely a rough way to even start the day, before we even got through qualifying, and that was that. But moving on to, the qualifiers in the night show, the first big incident was Roxon in the heat race going down, then screaming at Benny Bloss after the race was over. Well, it wasn't Bloss, it was Oldenburg. Aside from the fact that he was yelling at the wrong guy, it's a right-hand first turn. What are you supposed to do? And they're going for it. It's a short right-hand first turn. They didn't even get out of second gear once they came over the gate. They're all fighting for position. Kenny got the short end of the stick. I can understand being upset. You're down the first turn, but it's not like Oldenburg smashed into him. Oldenburg was definitely trying to make the corner, but he was on the inside of him. That's racing. It is what it is. Moving on from that, I can't remember if it was the same heat race or not, but unfortunately, it looks like we might have just lost the second of the factory Honda duo and the second Lawrence brother. Hunter messed up coming out of the corner and landed right at the tough block and down on his shoulder, and you could kind of see it in the broadcast. They were showing it a little bit more in the stadium for the fans, but the Astros medical crew, Bodner and everybody were really messing with his shoulder, and every time you do this, every time you see somebody do this to a rider after a crash, they're feeling around for the collarbone. If you can't feel anything here, your collarbone's broken. I had it happen to me before. I cracked my left collarbone, but luckily I cracked it. It didn't displace, and I could still feel it. So, I didn't have to have surgery or anything, but if they were feeling around that much for Hunter's collarbone, I'm assuming he's got a collarbone, if not a shoulder injury, but he definitely smacked his head. But then you saw him when they put the camera on him and he was in the back of the medical mule. They had that little collar around his neck. He did something. And I've never seen anybody, ride out with that that device on for a shoulder injury. Collarbone, yeah, which is why it's leading me to believe that it was a collarbone. No press release has come out yet, unfortunately. Best case scenario, nothing's wrong. He'll be a little bit banged up going into Detroit this weekend. But that was incident number 2 on the night. And then we get to the big one. Little less than halfway to go. Everybody's coming up on the lappers. Chase is out front. By the time the incident happened, Malcolm has gotten into second. Kenny is in third. They go into that sand section, and you got Jeremy Hand and Tristan Lane. And full disclosure, I've known Jeremy Hand since he was a little kid. I'm friends with him. I talked to him after the race. Tristan, there was nothing he could do. There really a whole lot Jeremy could do. And here's the thing. Everybody's been griping online. The lappers should have checked up and this and that. The lappers are still racing. Jeremy was racing Tristan. Tristan was racing Jeremy. There is nothing in the rules that say when you're getting lapped, you have to basically throw away a potential position, which is more money. It's an additional point when you're that far back in the field, but that was inside the top 15. It's in the sand section. It's Tampa, Florida, sand. It's synonymous with that area. That is why they brought that beach sand in for this race, because that sand is a staple of Tampa. Everybody knows Florida for being sand. That's the way it is. Ultimately, Kenny made a bad decision and bonsai'd it through the middle of the track. When that whole sand section was rutted, Kenny started from the outside, worked towards the middle because Tristan Lane was on the outside, in the line right there, trying to stay ahead of Jeremy Hand, who was center left. Kenny went more into Jeremy than Jeremy went into Kenny, and we ended up with what we ended up. I can understand everybody being upset. Dustin Pipes went over to Jeremy Hand's pit after the race and started screaming at him. Dustin's been around this long enough, and he even said as much to Jeremy. You can't expect something to go right every time when somebody is going 15 miles an hour faster through beach sand, no less. It took 3 laps. Every time the Dirtworks crew smoothed that section out, it took 3 laps before there were 10 ruts through it, and nobody could get through without an incident. Kenny cross-rutted. It sent him a little bit left. Unfortunately, it landed into Jeremy, and we saw the explosion afterwards. And unfortunately, it looked like it, if you watch that video back closely enough, Tristan Lane, I'm thinking his Supercross season's done because his arm didn't look good when it smacked Kenny's handlebar after Kenny's body hit Tristan's, or, the bike, whatever it was, hit Tristan Lane's front end. And, Tristan DNF'd the race. You could kind of tell he was holding his arm. But it was a racing incident, bottom line. I understand everybody being upset over at the Progressive Suzuki camp and the HEP Twisted Tea team and all that. But it was a racing incident. It was more so a bad decision on Kenny's part. If he would have waited another second, he would have gotten through the sand, gotten through both of them, and been on his way in a possible podium. It was just an unfortunate incident. For everybody throwing shade on Jeremy Hand, it was not his fault. It was a racing deal, and aside from all that, and you could see it on the broadcast, I was there in person, I was seeing a little bit more closely. Half of the guys that had blue flags were not waving them. Whether they were electing not to or they weren't paying attention, there could have been a lot more with the blue flags. Jeremy didn't know that Kenny was there. He knew Cooper was there. He had no idea Kenny was there. But there's a inconsistency amongst the flaggers with the blue flags. These guys will get the blue flags waved at them when a leader is right behind them. They will also get a blue flag waved at them when a leader is a full straightaway behind them. So those guys never know when, exactly when when the leaders are coming up behind them. And for everybody saying, well, they should look behind them. You don't look behind when you're riding a motorcycle on a track. Any real racer growing up has always been told, never look behind, always look forward when you're racing. Never look behind when because if you're looking behind, you're going backwards. That's the unwritten rule about motorcycle racing. So you can't expect the guys to look behind constantly. They're in a race of their own. Like I said, there's money on the line. There's additional money for advancing your position. There's an extra point for advancing your position in the championship, and those guys are wanting to get into those SMX playoffs here in September. Everybody throwing shade on Jeremy Hand? Absolutely not. It was a racing incident. Everybody at Twisted Tea Suzuki, full respect, but you guys need to just take a step back, calm down. Dustin, I don't think it was the right move to go over to Jeremy's. Jeremy, I talked to him afterwards. He understand it was an issue, but he didn't maliciously want to screw up Kenny's race. Jeremy's been doing this long enough. He's a smart enough racer. He knows. It was just an unfortunate deal. It was a racing incident. It happened. And we're just going to have to move on to Detroit at this point. And unfortunately, it messed up Kenny's race. It messed up Kenny's championship hopes. It was not an intentional. And people are more upset about this incident that I've been seeing online than anything with Vince Freeze in the last 12 years. Like, if you're more upset about Jeremy Hand being involved with what happened with Kenny than anything that Vince has ever done, you guys really need a reality check, because look at the receipts. That's all. That's the rest I'll say about it. As far as the rest of the top 5 goes from the 450 main event, after the incident with Kenny and Malcolm coming through the pack and taking the win, it was Cooper Webb in second. And I had Cooper winning that race. And I think with a better start, he had a better shot at it. Malcolm is on fire. Even if Cooper would have gotten the whole shot, it was going to be hard to keep Malcolm behind him with the way Malcolm is riding, especially through the whoops. But good on Cooper to salvage a second place after all that and ride to a second place after everything was said and done. Third went to Jason Anderson. He even said on the podium he was a 5th place guy, but because of everything that had happened with Kenny and Chase, he gets 3rd. Justin Cooper makes a pass in the final lap and a half to get 4th. And then Chase, with the bike damage after the crash and the whoops, rounds out the top 5. We're going into Detroit this weekend. Chase has a 5-point lead on Cooper Webb. Jed is out of the title chase. Eli is essentially out of the title chase. Hunter is now out of the title chase. So it's looking like right now a shootout between Chase and Cooper for this title. Does Malcolm gain confidence after this? Certainly he's got to be riding on a high, and I'm hoping he definitely went fishing yesterday with Big James. Maybe Little James went fishing too and relaxed, and then good vibes at the Baker factory this week starting today. But it was a exciting weekend of racing, and it's going to get more exciting as we head into Detroit. Too much happened for a week's time between Glendale and Tampa, but we still got a lot of racing left, and there's still a lot that could be happening. But that's the 450 breakdown. I appreciate you guys watching this. Like the video, comment, subscribe, share it around, and I'll see you later this week for a 250 breakdown.